History remembers Clint Eastwood as a symbol of grit and quiet strength, but few people realize how close that symbol came to never existing at all. At 21 years old, long before fame or film sets, he boarded a Navy bomber for what should have been an ordinary ride home. Instead, that aircraft vanished into the Pacific, carrying with it a future no one could yet imagine. This is one of those moments that forces you to confront how fragile destiny really is. One wrong decision, one mechanical failure, and entire lives are erased before they ever have the chance to unfold. Eastwood was not a legend then. He wasn't important, protected, or special. He was simply a young soldier trying to get back to base, unaware that history had placed him at the edge of disappearance. The reason this moment matters isn't because of who he would become, but because of what it teaches us now. We like to believe success is inevitable for certain people, that greatness announces itself early. It doesn't. Sometimes it hangs by a single thread, invisible, trembling, waiting to see whether a life continues or quietly ends without witnesses, like this moment. At 21, Clint Eastwood was not chasing destiny. He was following routine. His world was small and practical, shaped by duty, schedules, and the quiet arithmetic of getting from one place to another. He was stationed in California during the Korean War, months into service, earning his pay not through heroics, but through repetition, teaching swimming, keeping order, learning how to show up on time. There was nothing cinematic about his days, no sense that history was paying attention. He was young, anonymous, and focused on the same simple concerns most people carry at that age: family, relationships, the next weekend, the next obligation. He had just spent time visiting his parents and his girlfriend, ordinary moments that feel weightless until you realize how easily they can disappear. Returning to base mattered because responsibility mattered. He wore his uniform, followed procedure, and took advantage of a rule that allowed servicemen to fly if space was available. It wasn't ambition that put him on that aircraft, just practicality, free transportation, a faster way back, a decision any reasonable person would make without a second thought. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because nothing separates him from you here. He wasn't protected by fame or purpose. He didn't have a grand vision guiding his steps. He was simply a young man doing what made sense in the moment, trusting systems that usually work and routines that usually hold. That's why this part matters. Before crisis, life often feels stable, even boring. The danger is invisible, and the future feels wide open, almost guaranteed. It's easy to look backward and assign meaning, but in real time there was none. He couldn't know that these quiet choices, these ordinary movements through a normal life, were positioning him at the edge of irreversible. And that realization should slow you down, because the moments that shape us rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as routine, asking nothing more than compliance, patience, and trust.
That calm, that normalcy, is not safety. It's simply the pause before something changes forever. And in that pause, it's tempting to believe tomorrow will resemble today. That assumption is comforting, and it's dangerous. Youth makes the future feel flexible, forgiving, endless. At 21, consequences seem distant, almost theoretical. You assume there will always be time to correct course, to recover, to try again. That mindset isn't foolish, it's human. It's how most lives begin. But it also explains why turning points hit so hard. They interrupt momentum you didn't realize you were relying on. Eastwood carried no special awareness into that phase of his life, no sense of being tested or prepared for something larger. He was building discipline without knowing why, strength without knowing where it would be used, endurance without expecting to need it. That quiet preparation, formed inside ordinary days, is what makes the coming danger so unsettling. Because it reminds you that transformation often starts long before you recognize the moment that demands it from you. The reason Clint Eastwood ended up on that aircraft had nothing to do with destiny and everything to do with convenience. Military life in the early 1950s followed clear rules, and one of them allowed servicemen to fly on available military flights if they wore their uniform. It was a practical system designed to move people efficiently, not to protect them. When Eastwood arrived at the air station hoping for a ride south, there was only one plane headed in his direction. It wasn't built for passengers. It wasn't meant for comfort, but it was going where he needed to go. This is how danger often enters a life, quietly, through reasonable choices. A free ride sounds harmless. A routine flight sounds safe. The aircraft, a Douglas AD-1Q Sky Raider, was a workhorse of its time, trusted by the military and flown by trained pilots. Nothing about it suggested drama or risk. There were no warnings, no alarms, no sense that something was being gambled. Saying yes felt logical. Saying no would have felt unnecessary. Eastwood didn't weigh the decision as a crossroads. He didn't pause to consider alternate futures. Why would he? Thousands of similar flights had taken place without incident. Procedures had been followed. A pre-flight check was completed. The pilot was experienced. Everything that signals safety was present. This is how risk becomes invisible, wrapped in familiarity and authority. We trust systems because most of the time they work. What makes this moment unsettling is its ordinariness. There was no reckless choice, no rule broken, no dramatic gamble. Just a young man sitting where he was told to sit, trusting that the machine and the process would do what they were designed to do. The danger wasn't forced, it was embedded. A single aircraft, a single route, a chain of small assumptions stacked quietly on top of one another. And that's the uncomfortable truth worth sitting with. Life-changing moments rarely arrive announced. They slip in disguised as efficiency and routine. We normalize risk when it feels familiar, when others around us treat it as standard. We tell ourselves that if something were truly dangerous, someone would stop it, someone would warn us. But systems don't feel fear. They don't sense consequence. They only function until they don't. Eastwood boarded that plane believing he was choosing the easiest option, not the most dangerous one. In that decision lives a lesson most people only recognize in hindsight. The path that feels smooth is not always the path that is safe. Sometimes it is simply the path that hasn't revealed its cost yet. This is why inevitability matters more than drama here. Nothing pushed him forward except momentum, habit, and trust. The plane did not promise danger, and the moment did not feel significant. That quiet normality is what makes the outcome so powerful, because it reminds you how easily a life can drift into a defining moment without realizing it has already begun. No warning, no ceremony, no preparation.
As the plane climbed into the air, everything seemed ordinary, almost routine, yet the first sign of instability appeared quietly, almost innocuously. The rear hatch wouldn't stay closed, a minor annoyance at first, easily corrected with wire and effort, but already signaling that the systems meant to protect and contain were not infallible. Each movement of the aircraft reminded Eastwood that he was perched within a machine whose reliability was only assumed, not guaranteed. Then the oxygen system failed, and with it came the first true awareness that this was no ordinary flight. It was one thing to trust a machine, another to realize the very air you breathe depends on it functioning correctly. The pilot adjusted altitude, but instinct replaced instruments, and a creeping tension settled in, subtle at first, then growing, a quiet pressure that made every breath feel heavier than the last. The radios went dead next, and suddenly communication, the most human lifeline in mechanical transport, vanished. Eastwood was isolated, trapped in a compartment that now felt more like a cell than a seat. The navigation instruments faltered, forcing instinct, memory, and hope to fill the gaps left by failing technology. How do you trust yourself to guide a massive aircraft through invisible skies when every tool that gives certainty is gone? Each problem compounded the previous, and each solution required improvisation, courage, and discipline. The moment stretched longer than it should have, a test of awareness and patience, the ordinary rules of travel replaced with the raw calculus of survival. As the Pacific fog thickened, it became a wall, silent and impenetrable, hiding landmarks, horizons, and distance. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and instinct took over where vision failed. How often in life do we operate under the illusion of control, only to find ourselves navigating unseen obstacles, forced to make decisions with incomplete information? Every failure intensified the tension, layering fear beneath responsibility, a lesson in humility and persistence. The sense of isolation deepened. The small compartment that once felt confining now became a crucible, a space where mental resilience mattered as much as physical endurance. Each failure chipped away at the illusion of safety until the flight path itself seemed uncertain, a question mark in motion. Then came the fuel gauge, its needle plunging toward empty, a mechanical simplicity with catastrophic consequences. What began as minor inconveniences had converged into a situation where no step could be reversed, where every decision bore weight, and where contingency became critical. The pilot was left with instinct, skill, and courage alone. The quiet escalation, the hatch, the oxygen, the radios, the navigation, the fuel, revealed a fundamental truth: control is fragile, and circumstances can compound faster than anticipation. Each failure was a building block, stacking tension and uncertainty, teaching that preparation, presence of mind, and calm assessment are the only shields against spiraling danger. In those minutes, time itself warped. Seconds stretched as problems multiplied, each new complication layering over the last, creating a rhythm of escalation. There was no dramatization, no sensationalism, only the unyielding logic of cause and effect, of machinery imperfectly trusted, of human decision weighed against chance. The experience demanded clarity, demanded awareness, demanded acceptance of circumstances beyond choice. Eastwood would not yet know how close he was to disaster, but every failure tightened the invisible cord that separates survival from catastrophe, and each moment required quiet, focused endurance, the kind of discipline that only emerges under relentless pressure, when ordinary trust has been stripped away and only presence remains. The moment had arrived when theory collided with reality, when preparation met the inescapable truth. The plane was no longer just an inconvenience, it was a vessel heading toward the unknown. The fuel had nearly run out, the instruments were unreliable, and the fog offered no guidance. At that instant, the pilot made the decision every trained aviator fears, yet must be ready to enact: the choice to ditch the aircraft into the ocean. It was not dramatic heroism, it was a calculation, an assessment of options, and a recognition that there were no perfect outcomes, only the best possible response under impossible circumstances. How do you trust someone with your life in a moment like that? You rely on skill, instinct, and years of discipline, and hope that it is enough. Eastwood, confined to the cramped radar compartment, felt the plane shift and descend, but understanding the full scope of danger was difficult. There was no time for panic, only the acute awareness that survival depended on clarity, calm, and focus. The decision to aim for the water, to meet the Pacific with controlled impact, carried weight far beyond the mechanics of flight. Every second mattered. Every movement could mean the difference between life and the deep, indifferent ocean. It was a moment where preparation collided with fate, and the smallest misjudgment could be fatal. The pilot's hands, guided by training and instinct, turned a potentially catastrophic plunge into a manageable, though violent, descent. The impact itself was brutal yet measured. Momentum carried the aircraft briefly before the ocean's current began to claim it. There was no relief, no victory, only the stark reality of exposure, cold, and isolation. Eastwood and the pilot scrambled into life rafts, the ocean immediately beginning to assert its authority, waves tugging them apart, reminding them that this was only the beginning of the trial. Survival had been bought for a moment, but the fight was far from over. How often in life do we encounter such turning points, moments where skill meets chance and the outcome remains uncertain until every factor has played its hand? This was not luck, it was calculation, courage, and the unyielding application of knowledge under extreme conditions. Yet even as Eastwood felt the water around him, frigid and unyielding, there remained a question hanging in the air. Would this controlled choice be enough? Could preparation and instinct truly counteract the randomness of nature? The answer had yet to reveal itself, and in that uncertainty, the story teaches us a vital lesson. Survival, like all pivotal moments, requires both readiness and the humility to confront what cannot be controlled, trusting skill to meet circumstance, knowing the outcome still hangs in delicate balance. The ocean was merciless and immediate, a cold and unyielding expanse that erased all sense of familiarity. Eastwood found himself separated from the life raft, the small, unstable flotation device swept away by a wave as quickly as it appeared. For a moment, panic threatened, a primal reaction to a world suddenly stripped of control. How do you act when the very element that sustains life feels like an adversary? It is in these moments that preparation becomes the invisible anchor. 6 months as a swimming instructor had given him more than skill. It had instilled a discipline of thought, a methodology for enduring cold, fatigue, and fear. He knew instinctively to conserve energy, to regulate his breathing, to focus on the next stroke rather than the impossibility of the distance ahead. The water stabbed at him with every movement, each limb a negotiation between pain and necessity. Muscles cramped from the cold, a physical rebellion against survival, yet he pushed forward, repeating silently a mantra that sustained him. Others have made it through, so can I. Time lost all ordinary meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, and hours felt compressed into endless cycles of breath and stroke. The lights of the distant shore appeared as fragile beacons, sometimes vanishing, sometimes returning, a cruel tease of hope that demanded he stay both vigilant and calm. How do you measure endurance when each movement is agony and the outcome remains uncertain? The answer lies in the surrender to process, not outcome, in the relentless focus on immediate action instead of hypothetical disaster. Beneath the surface, dangers lurked unseen. He did not know he was swimming through a prime breeding ground for great white sharks, and that ignorance, though unintentional, spared him the terror that might have shattered resolve. What would fear have done in that moment? It might have consumed him, but clarity preserved him. He remained entirely in the present, each motion purposeful, each breath controlled. The environment was indifferent, but his mind imposed order on the chaos, transforming vulnerability into action.
Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he felt sand beneath his feet. Shaking, exhausted, every muscle screaming, he crawled onto the shore, understanding in a visceral way that survival is never accidental. It is the intersection of preparation, resilience, and unyielding presence of mind. Alone in the water, facing the raw, impartial force of nature, Eastwood had discovered something essential, that courage is a practiced discipline, that fear can be acknowledged without surrender,
and that survival begins in the mind long before it is realized in the body. When Eastwood finally felt the resistance of sand beneath his feet, relief washed over him, yet it was tempered by exhaustion, cold, and the sharp awareness that survival had not ended with reaching the shore. Each step toward solid ground was laborious, his muscles locked in protest, his body reminding him of the hours spent battling the indifferent ocean. Yet every painful motion carried with it a profound realization. He had endured what most would not have, and he had emerged alive. How often do we confront moments that demand everything of us, only to underestimate the quiet transformation they ignite? The ocean had tested him, stripped him to essentials, and in return offered a lesson no classroom could replicate. As he moved toward a distant light, eventually reaching the radio station at Point Reyes, the absurdity of it all became apparent. For local newspapers, this was a minor report. 2 servicemen survived an emergency water landing. No major injuries, back to their units the next day. Nothing hinted at the seismic effect it would have decades later. Nothing that suggested the survival of a young soldier might ripple through history to influence storytelling, filmmaking, and the shaping of a cinematic icon. Life has a way of obscuring significance until years later, when reflection reveals that the near tragedy was, in a sense, a safeguard, a pivot upon which a future unfolded. That night, Eastwood would have felt only the immediate weight of cold, fatigue, and relief, yet unconsciously the experience planted seeds of resilience, focus, and respect for life's fragile balance. It is often in these crucibles of survival that character is forged, when the mind adapts to relentless pressure, and when the clarity of purpose emerges not from planning, but from necessity. Surviving the Pacific did more than preserve a life. It shaped how he approached challenge, risk, and storytelling, embedding in him a profound understanding of human vulnerability and perseverance. Later, as a director and actor, he would draw upon this encounter repeatedly, translating personal experience into artistic insight. Hereafter, Sully and countless portrayals of quiet determination and resilience reflect more than imagination. They echo lived reality. The ocean, indifferent and powerful, had been a teacher. Survival, endurance, and the capacity to maintain focus amid chaos had been the lessons. And as viewers, we are reminded that moments which seem minor, even incidental at the time, may hold the power to define a legacy, to forge skills, attitudes, and perspectives that reach far beyond the immediate struggle, shaping a life in ways only visible with the clarity of hindsight. When you step back and consider that night, it becomes clear how fragile the line is between tragedy and legend. One hatch that refused to close, one oxygen system that faltered, one wave that swept a raft away. Any single detail might have tipped the balance, ending a life before it had even begun to leave a mark. How often do we recognize that our own paths are shaped by variables we barely notice, moments of chance that carry consequences far beyond our understanding? In that dim, fog-shrouded Pacific, the difference between survival and disaster was measured in inches, seconds, and decisions, each amplified by circumstance and skill. Eastwood's life hung at the intersection of preparation and randomness, and the result, decades later, is a story we know, a legend we revere, but one that could have been erased by the smallest misstep. It invites reflection. What are the invisible moments in our own lives quietly shaping our destinies? The experience also teaches us something profound about resilience and human capacity. Eastwood emerged from the water alive, but transformed. Endurance, focus, and courage were no longer abstract virtues. They were practical tools that had been tested against a merciless environment. He would carry that understanding into every subsequent challenge, both in life and in art, translating survival into insight, and insight into the capacity to inspire others. Is it not remarkable how a single night in the shadow of potential catastrophe can forge skills and perspectives that ripple across decades, influencing choices, careers, and even cultural legacy? The ocean did not discriminate, yet from its indifference arose a narrative of empowerment and determination, a testament to the thin margin between catastrophe and greatness. And here lies the awe-inspiring truth. Stories like this resonate because they remind us that life is unpredictable, that survival is a combination of skill, preparation, and chance, and that every seemingly insignificant decision can echo far into the future. We are left not only marveling at what was survived, but also contemplating the what-ifs, the variables that, had they shifted, would have rewritten history entirely. So pause for a moment, reflect on the fragility and power of human existence, and consider how the choices you make or the luck you encounter shape the trajectory of your own life. Share your thoughts, your reflections, and perhaps your own moments of narrow escape, because in understanding the thin line between tragedy and legend, we honor both courage and circumstance, and in doing so, we deepen our appreciation for the stories that define us.